Hello all, welcome to a lesson on body paragraphs in a literary analysis essay. So step 1, the body paragraph. At this point in the writing process, you should have developed a thesis statement and introduction paragraph, and they might just be drafts, but you should have those. Now it is time to begin planning the body paragraphs. The body paragraph is the place in the essay where you provide the evidence to prove your argument. To illustrate how a body paragraph functions in an essay, think about criminal court of law. An attorney presents an argument to a jury. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my client is not guilty, and then proves it with evidence, fingerprints, DNA testing, photographs, testimonies, etc. This is similar to the claim and evidence of the thesis statement in a literary analysis essay. Both are arguments, just in different contexts for different purposes. So consider the following chart. In a court of law, the argument is the person is guilty or not guilty. Maybe have 3 pieces of evidence: fingerprints, DNA, and or photographs. Literary analysis essay, the argument is ambition leads to corruption, but you still have 3 pieces of evidence: characterization, the symbol of the dagger, and the ethos appeal. As you can see in the chart above, the argument presented in a court of law is parallel to that of a literary analysis essay in the structure of the argument. In both types of arguments, the arguer is presenting an argument and then supporting it with evidence. In both types of arguments, it is usually best to give at least 3 pieces of evidence in order to prove the argument. In a court of law, the evidence would shape the speeches and questioning of the attorney. In a literary analysis essay, the pieces of evidence become the topics of the body paragraphs. While an attorney's job is to prove a not guilty or guilty claim, the job of the literary analysis essay is to prove a thematic claim. So each body paragraph is focused on showing how the thematic claim is a valid interpretation of a piece of literature. So the goal of the body paragraphs is to prove the thesis statement. As was explained in the first video where I went through the graphic outliner, the thesis statement is the bridge, right? It's the where you drive, it is the support, or it's on the chairs where you sit. The body paragraphs are the legs that hold it up, that give it structure, that make it stand. In each body paragraph of the literary analysis essay, the writer is trying to prove the thesis statement. Therefore, in each body paragraph, the writer must revisit the thesis statement as you discuss each piece of evidence, and you must explain each piece of evidence so that it is convincing and makes sense to the audience. Let's revisit that courtroom example. An attorney has to consider who his audience is when he explains evidence. In the case of a courtroom, his audience, or her audience, is a jury of people that have various backgrounds. So he or she or they need to be very clear when they explain the evidence in case no one in the jury has a background in reading evidence. Let's say that the first piece of evidence presented to the jury is fingerprint evidence. Does the typical person know how to analyze fingerprints? No. Does the typical person know how to identify a person based on fingerprint evidence? Probably not. The fingerprint evidence will need to be explained to the jury. So the attorney will take the time to call an expert witness to explain what the fingerprint evidence shows, and he will give examples of this in his explanation. So how does this apply to writing a literary analysis essay? Well, a writer does the same thing as the attorney by presenting evidence and then thoroughly explaining how it shows the argument is true. In your essay, you will present the evidence and then explain how it connects to the overall argument, just as the attorney explains how the fingerprint evidence shows his client is not guilty. And you folks probably know where I'm going with this, but it's that PEE structure over and over again, right? Point, evidence, explanation. Your point is your thesis. Your evidence is the literary evidence from your text. The explanation is you telling me how that evidence proves your thesis. So let's look at a courtroom illustration of what happens when evidence is not explained. Attorney says, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I am going to show you fingerprint evidence that proves my client is not guilty. Here is the fingerprint. Look at it closely. Thank you." Okay, now, is this a convincing argument? If you were just shown a picture of a fingerprint, you would not understand how that person is not guilty. You wouldn't be convinced, right? Therefore, it's not enough to tell the evidence to your audience without explaining it. They will not understand how the evidence connects to the argument, and they will not see what it is you want them to see. It's also kind of thinking about it like in math, right? If you just look at the question, then give the answer, we don't know the steps that you've taken to get to that point. And you may get the wrong answer, you may get the right answer, but we don't know how you got there. In a literary analysis essay, you need to explain everything. Don't assume that I understand what you mean, because I might make different assumptions or have different understandings than you. So you need to explain yourself clearly. So here's an example of the fingerprint evidence explained. Attorney says, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'm going to show you fingerprint evidence that proves my client is not guilty. Let's look at the fingerprint together. This is the only fingerprint collected at the crime scene, and it does not match my client's fingerprint. When you look at the crime scene fingerprint and my client's fingerprint side by side, you begin to notice that the swirl patterns are very different. The one from the crime scene is an arch pattern and comes to an upward point, and my client's fingerprint is a loop pattern that curves to the side. These are two completely different fingerprint patterns from two completely different individuals, which clearly shows he was not there the night this crime was committed. The only conclusion here is not guilty. In this example, the attorney has provided a clear explanation of the evidence by explaining the differences between the fingerprints. He has also connected back to his thesis statement of not guilty 2 times to reiterate what this evidence shows. Likewise, this is the same goal of the body paragraph in a literary analysis essay. The body paragraph of the literary analysis essay must also explain the evidence and connect back to the thesis. Consider the following body paragraph from a literary analysis essay. In Macbeth, the title character goes from being a once noble soldier to an egomaniacal killer, which shows that ambition leads to corruption. In the play, he kills lots of people. So, this shows that ambition leads to corruption. Okay, well, it's pretty obvious to see that this body paragraph is missing the explanation of evidence entirely. Not only is it missing an explanation, but it's also missing specific evidence. Which people does Macbeth murder in the play? This paragraph needs textual evidence that needs to be explained in connection to the thesis statement. As a writer, you need to connect the dots for the reader. Anytime you rely upon the reader for making a connection, your argument will be completely lost because your reader will just be confused, and confusion does not make a strong argument. Here's a better body paragraph with specific evidence and explanation, and you can even see here, it's just a lot longer. So in Macbeth, the title character goes from being a once noble soldier to an egomaniacal killer, which shows that ambition leads to corruption. So here is your point, right? Here's how it relates back to your thesis. You always start with that. In Act 1 of the play, the bloody captain refers to Macbeth as noble when he explains to the king how Macbeth stopped the invading Norwegian traitor. Beginning the play with such positive characterization sets up how far Macbeth falls in the story and how much his conscience changes. The bloody soldier relates how Macbeth sought out the traitor and unseamed him from the knave to the chaps, which essentially means cut him in half. Macbeth is a hardened soldier who does not hesitate to kill when he knows it is just. However, as the play progresses and Macbeth becomes more and more tempted by the witch's prophecy that he will be king, the horrid image of committing the unjust murder of the king torments Macbeth's conscience. When Macbeth decides that he will kill the king for the sole reason of vaulting ambition, he has changed from the noble soldier that risked his life to save his country. In fact, Macbeth becomes so corrupt by his ambition that he ignores all the reasons not to kill the king outlined in his double trust soliloquy. As Macbeth goes into the king's chambers to murder the king, he is no longer the valiant soldier that acts without hesitation. He goes into a trance-like state and imagines that he sees an invisible dagger as the result of his heat-oppressed brain due to the fact he knows the murder is not justified. This shows that ambition leads to corruption because Macbeth, a once noble and valiant soldier, goes from protecting his king to committing regicide in the name of ambition. So strong evidence there, a lot of paraphrasing, not a whole lot of direct quotations, but it does do a strong job of explaining this point, right? And it does have evidence that helps to support that point. And we have ambition and corruption in our concluding statements. So we're repeating over and over again, just like with the fingerprints, the expert said, he is not guilty, he is not guilty, this person's not guilty. You need to keep coming back to, your theme statement, right? In this one, it's ambition leads to corruption, ambition leads to corruption, ambition leads to corruption. We say it over and over again. Repetition helps us to remember things. So notice, provide some specific quotations, as I've said that, and always connects. This is what you must do in your own body paragraphs. Always remember that the goal of the body of the essay is to prove the thesis statement and explain the evidence. Connect the dots for your reader in these paragraphs, and you will better be able to convince them of your literary interpretation. Okay? Step 2 is a paragraph ratiocination activity. For the following student sample body paragraphs, complete the ratiocination guide. Then answer the following questions for each one. Remembering that ratiocination is just like a logical or reasonable approach to something. You're given here the guide. Okay? So here's your guide. Highlight the topic sentence. Highlight the concluding sentence. Underline in the paragraph where the writer connects to the claim from the thesis statement. Circle the piece of evidence being discussed, and then highlight the quotations or textual evidence in a different color, and highlight the explanations of evidence in a different color. Hopefully you have enough highlighters. If you don't, you can use like a pencil crayon to underline things or lightly shade stuff. Do what you can to identify these different pieces of the paragraph. Okay. Again, I'm not going to read these out loud just for the sake of time. I don't want you to get weighed down too long in listening to me versus getting your work done. So read the thesis and body paragraphs, answer the questions, making sure you're also using this guide to annotate your paragraphs. When you're done reading and you're done your ratiocination guide or you're annotating, think, how is the paragraph organized? What is the pattern you see emerging? What's the purpose of the topic sentence? What's the purpose of the concluding sentence? How does the writer use textual evidence, and how does the writer connect the evidence to the thesis statement? For these paragraphs, for at least paragraph number 1, I want you to get in touch with me with your answers. Okay? Whether or not you create a Word document and submit that as part of the assignment, or you give me a phone call, or you just do it through our chat, any of those ways is fine. But let me know, okay? I really want to check to make sure that you're doing okay with this and to understand how these paragraphs work. If you are handing it in as a Word document in your assignment, just maybe shoot me a quick message saying that's what you did so that I know to check that out right away, okay? There's a second paragraph here, same ratiocination guide, okay? And same questions as well at the end. And please go through this. If you want feedback, let me know. I for sure want to see that first paragraph though. And here's a third one. Same ratiocination guide and the same questions. The paragraphs get sort of consistently more complex and more thoughtful as you go. They get longer as you go. So I do recommend that you go through all 3. So now that you've taken a look at some body paragraphs, and you've thought about their basic structure, it's now time to look at structure and specific parts of your body paragraph so that you know exactly what you should have in yours. A structured body paragraph has 8 parts. The topic sentence, of course, it introduces the topic of your paragraph, it summarizes the paragraph, and connects back to the thesis statement. Your second part is a quotation number 1 to support the topic sentence. This part of the paragraph provides the first example of evidence that shows the topic sentence. This evidence should be a quotation from the text that is blended smoothly into an original sentence. The third part is explanation of quotation 1. Should be, try for 2 sentences. Okay? This is the part of the paragraph that explains how the evidence shows the topic sentence and thesis statement is true. This section, try for 2 sentences in length, but if you have one long, complex sentence, that's okay too, as long as you are explaining things well. You'll have a second quotation if possible, and then a second explanation of that quotation. You may have an optional third quotation, not super necessary, but again, same format as your first 2 quotations. And then you have a concluding sentence. This part of the paragraph summarizes the main point of the paragraph once again. This sentence should be different from the topic sentence, but it should repeat key words and ideas from the topic sentence and thesis statement. So this means that a fully developed body paragraph will be 8 or more sentences in length, and that most of the body paragraph will contain explanations of evidence, not summaries of the plot, but explanations. A lot of what I see is, so this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and because of that series of events, that proves my thesis. That's not necessarily how that works, okay? It's not a plot summary, it's an argument, and you need to remember that. Observe the following body paragraph that has been ratiocinated, ratiocinated according to the paragraph key above. Hopefully you can just look at this again. I'm not going to take you through it because it's a long one. But I do want you now to think about your own body paragraphs following the structure that's provided, and understand that if I were to follow the ratiocination guide that I've provided here for you guys, go up. If I follow this guide, after I look at your paragraphs, I should be able to do all of these things, right? I should be able to highlight a topic sentence and a concluding sentence. I should be able to underline in the paragraph where the writer connects to the claim. I should be able to circle a piece of evidence, highlight quotations, and highlight explanations. When you're editing your own essay, this is a really good way to make sure you've got all the pieces in there, right? Since you've done this work already with some paragraphs, hopefully all 3 of these that I've provided for you, if you can do that to your own essay and you have all these pieces, you're going to be looking good. Okay, so that's part of that writing process, part of the drafting process, the revision process. Okay, don't just throw something on the page and hand it in. Take a little bit of time to go through it and make sure you have all of those requisite pieces. And I promise, if you follow this structure that I've given you in this handout today, you will have good body paragraphs, you will have a strong argument, and you will get a great mark on your essay. Thanks, folks.